Everyone. Today we're going to take a look at arrays and strings and indices and that sort of thing through building a Hangman game. So let's get right into it. Right now I'm in a new REPL, and you can create one by accessing REPL.it as usual. So first, to get started, we're going to first just define some variables. The first of which is going to be our word to guess. We could make this whole game a bit more complex and make it so we randomly pick a word to guess each time, so it's a bit more fun and interesting. But for this example, we're just going to do it this way. I think most of you, with the prior knowledge we have from previous lessons, should be able to figure out how to make the other thing happen. Next up, we're going to define a guess variable for basically the user's guess are like updating each time they guess. So we're just gonna set this to underscore 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 underscore, right? So each time the user guesses a letter, it's gonna be filled up here. But in this example, what we want to do is actually convert this guess variable into something known as a list. And this function called list will basically turn the string inside of this. We've already discussed strings, right? They're basically text, but it's going to convert this into an array. And what an array is basically a list of assorted items, and it makes it much easier to interact and manage each item much easier. For example, if I were to print this out, this is an array right here. This array involves like basically 5 characters, each with an underscore, but you can create an array on anything else as well. For example, shopping list could be something like so here what we're doing is defining an array, and the way we're doing it is by adding these 2 brackets, one at the start and one at the end. And inside of here you can add any sort of data type, but they all have to be the same, and each item or object just has to be separated by a comma. The same applies for like integers as well, right? We could do something like so this could be a list or slash array of integers. But back to the Hangman game, we're basically going to create a list of underscores that we're going to update each time the user guesses a letter. We'll get on how we're actually going to use this a bit more later. Next up, we're going to define a health variable so that when this health runs out, the game should be lost. The user should be like the user loses, right? Next, we're going to define a loop so that the user can continue guessing while their health is above 0. And inside of this, first off, we're just going to do some basic print statements to make it clear to the user what step or what stage of the game they're at. I'm just going to print an empty line and then their current value or their current guess. The way we're going to do this is a bit complicated. It's going to use a new function called join, and there's not much behind this function. What this is doing is joining this array back into a string. So instead of looking like this, it's going to look like that, so it's a lot more clear to the user. There's not much more that goes behind it. I think this is just one of those things you can memorize to use later on. Next up, I'm going to alert the user about their current health. Next up, I'm going to print another empty line. This is just for readability, but you don't need these empty lines here. And just for future reference, you can like basically print an empty line just by typing out print and then the 2 parentheses, but not including any string inside of the parentheses. next up, I'm going to actually get our input from the user. I'll call it guess letter, and this is going to be in the form of input, right? And for the prompt, I'm going to say, this can be any prompt you want, really. I just said guess a letter in the word. That kind of makes sense, right? Here, now I'm just going to add a bit of error checking real quick. This is not that needed, but it's just so we don't run into any errors or like logic problems, right? Later down the line, we don't want the user to give us an incorrect input. We're going to do this. First off, we want to check that the user has not inputted like a word and that they've only inputted a letter. The way we're going to do this is through a new function. Once again, it's going to be called len. Len is a function used to tell you the length of a string or an array, and all you need to do is type out the string's name or the array's name inside of here. In this case, we're going to type out guess letter, and what this is going to tell us is the length of the user's input right here. So you want to make sure that if it's greater than 1, we're going to print out some sort of like message to the user saying that they can't really use it. Something like that. Again, this can be whatever you want here. Another error we can check for is that if they've already like guessed a letter, and we can check this using another sort of syntax right here called in. And what this does is just check if guess letter is in guess. And for our program, what that's doing is checking if the user's input is inside of their already guessed and correct letters. Right, and if that is true, we can print out another sort of error here. Lastly, let's move on to the bulk of our code. Here we're going to actually check if the user's guess letter is part of the word to guess, and if it is, they're going to update guess right here, and if it isn't, they're going to lose health. So we can do that pretty simply. First off, we need another if statement. Within this else, it's a nested if statement. Let's check if guess letter in word to guess, and like I said, with the in syntax right here, it's just going to check if guess letter is in word to guess. Pretty simple. I'm just going to define another variable here, getting the index of So this is where arrays get a bit more complicated than the other sort of structures that we've used so far. So arrays have this thing known as an index, and what an index does is tell you what location a certain item in the array is at. For example, if we had an array, say milk again. Here, what our index would be is, for bread, the index is 0. For butter, the index would be 1. And for milk, the index would be 2. And it would continue as such if we had more items in our array. And so what we're trying to do in this part of the program is find out the index of this letter that the user has guessed within the word. Right, for example, if the user has guessed H, the letter H, then the index would be 0, 1, so it would be 1. And what we want to do is update our guess word array here with the letter H at index 1. So it's representative to the user that they've guessed one word correctly and it's at that location. So the way we're doing that is through another new function. And here what we're doing is finding the index of guess letter within word guess. I hope most people can get used to this after we use it a bit more. And here is a new piece of syntax that's special to arrays. Here we're basically changing the value at index A to guess letter. Let's say in this example, once again, let's say we pick index 1. What we're doing is within this array's index 1, we want to update it to something else. So what we would do is, let's say if this was called shopping list, we could do like shopping list, and then you have to use these two brackets and then type out the index, and then you can update it to something else, and that would work. So we're going to try to apply the same thing here and change guesses index A to guess letter. And we're just going to let the user know that they got it correct. Else, if they did not get it correct, we're going to just decrease their health and print wrong. Now lastly, what we just want to check is that if their like guess is equivalent to the word to guess, so that if they've guessed all of the letters correctly, then we can exit out of our loop. The way we're going to do this is by typing out the same thing at the start. So what this is going to do is basically convert our array back to a string. So from this sort of thing here back to like a string slash text like this. So let's say when the user has successfully guessed all of the letters, it's going to be, instead of this, it's going to be GHOST. And by the way, I just use this word randomly. It doesn't have to be this word. It can be any word. But so yeah, if they guessed it correctly, we want to break out of the loop, and I'm pretty sure we discussed this when we discussed loops. Break is just going to exit out of our loop. And lastly, we're just going to let the user know if they've won or not, right? So we can copy this over. If that is true, then print. And if it is not, I don't know. These are just like random statements to say if they won or not. But you can change this to your liking. So yeah, that's all for our code here. It's a lot more complex, I think, than most of the projects we've worked on so far. But let's run it and see how it works. Your current health is 8. Guess a letter in the word. Let's say, for example, I type out like A. It says wrong because that's not in our word that we've picked. But instead, if I said something like G, that is in the word, so it's going to update our guess to have a G and then 4 underscores. And then I can continue guessing right or wrong. And if I guess wrong, my health decreases, and if I guess right, it updates properly. And so yeah, our program successfully works. That's all for this tutorial and workshop lesson.